Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, it doesn't get any closer to this than this. The state faces the June 30 budget deadline. The legislature is at work on, guess what? Not just the budget, but pensions, liquor privatization, transportation bill. All of that crowds into the House and Senate agenda with very little time to get the job done. And then, guess what? We're going to have a little update on the infrastructure, transportation spending. Where does all that stand? All of that follows these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back. Well, it's crunch time, as they say in Harrisburg, and I have two veteran reporters who've been there and done that, I think I could say. Brad Bumsted with the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review and Robert Swift with Times-Shamrock newspapers. Hey, both you guys have been, how many scenarios getting down to can they get the budget done on time? You've been through this for what, 30 years or so?
About that, yeah. And so they, one of the things that right now we're in a stage of people saying, is this dead, is this alive, does this have a chance? And I always go back to, on these issues like transportation, liquor, at some point each chamber has to cast its own floor vote, go on the record, and then it sort of clarifies things and people can figure, okay, that's what passed each chamber. Well, that hasn't, the House still has to do liquor, or sorry, transportation, the Senate still has to do liquor, they both have to do pensions. And you really have to have those floor votes. And then it may not, as we saw with the casino law a decade ago and the impact fee law with 2 years ago, it may not happen in this time frame. It may be this sets it for the next crunch time.
Brad Bumsted, you also have been through this. I mean, I think, and maybe I'm wrong, everybody I talk with says, Governor Corbett has a lot on the line here. I mean, he's got three huge issues that we've been talking about on this program for, almost since he was elected. Is this maybe one of the big moments in his tenure as governor?
It could be a turning point. He's down in the polls. He needs a victory out of this of some sort. Some of the Republicans in the legislature are inclined to give him something. But what that's going to be won't be easy. Look, they're running out of time to be able to do the transportation and liquor bill. It takes time to get those in bill form. The Senate proposal isn't even in legislation yet. And to get that passed out of committee, passed in the Senate over to the House, they're not even the votes for it yet, Senator Pileggi says.
Well, let's talk about a couple of these. We're going to do transportation in detail in a moment or two with Bob Latham. But Robert, let's talk about, let's take liquor. The Senate this past week, the head of the relevant committee comes out with a new plan. The LCB would stay the same. We would stay in place. They'd do some privatization, expand some beer sales. It seems to have gotten everybody, not on board, right?
And it's just taking the existing licensees now and giving them the opportunity for an expanded permit to go into, wine and liquor off premises or to go. Gives the beer distributors something. Has a study of the wholesale operation. The opponents claim it's too much proliferation. You don't hear much of a law enforcement component to the Senate proposal. It's not a bill. Of course, in the House passed bill, there was a large law enforcement provision in there.
Well, under the plan, as I understand it, Brad, you've been following this, I think, probably a little more close. The wholesale operation would still remain in the hands of the state, sort of like Virginia. The retail would be expanded. Now, over the House version was very different that the Senate has before it because they want wholesale and retail, as Robert points out, completely privatized, correct?
The House version that passed in March would dismantle the LCB, the state stores rather. They'd keep the LCB, but over a period of years they would phase it out. It would get rid of the wholesale system. The Senate bill proposal by Senator Chuck McElhaney would do neither of those two things. It would have a 2-year study to determine the wholesale, and it would not get rid of the retail sales at the state stores. So you'd have private businesses competing with the state stores. And here's the thing. it's not enough privatization for a lot of Republicans that I've talked to. But one thread that came out in some of the interviews yesterday was if the Senate was willing to put date certains in there for ending the state stores or the wholesale system, even if it's 5 years down the road, it's going to pick up support.
Yeah. But as you all are pointing out, the difficulty, it seems to me, is this. The Republicans, particularly over in the House, without getting into the weeds, led by Majority Leader Terzai, want the system completely privatized. The Democrats say, let's keep the system but modernize it. There's some modernizing features in it. So doesn't, Robert, the plan that Senator McElhenney comes up with sort of get both sides not happy with it because it's a hybrid that doesn't satisfy either?
But here's the difference. What's happening now is in the Republican side, they're talking about how to privatize.
Right.
Not whether to do it, it's how to do it. And the McElhenney plan does give the LCB, authority to if these state stores, there's no timetable, but if one's not doing well, which they can do now, they can close it. So they're talking about the mechanics now. That's what's changed.
We're going to run to a break. Brad was smiling. The likelihood of that happening, I think, is not very big. All right, when we come back, we're going to continue this discussion. We want to get into this business of pensions. It's pretty important. We now have a new a proposal out of the Senate. We'll see where that goes after we pay some bills.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Business Council Education Foundation, educating citizens and business leaders about important public policy issues and civic affairs. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by BetterSaferRoads.com. To voice your support for safer highways and less traffic congestion, visit BetterSaferRoads.com. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, welcome back. Well, we're talking about these waning days of this current, I can't say current session, but before the summer break with the legislature. Huge issues in front of them, important to the Commonwealth, important to Governor Corbett. Both parties at odds over what to do about this. Nothing new about that. Brad, you wanted to make a point about the sort of where each of the parties sort of stand. I think that's pretty accurate, with Democrats not likely to support much of what the governor and Republicans want. Make your point.
Well, just that if you do come up with a plan that tries to balance things with a timetable, let's say, you gain some votes, but you lose some votes. Senator was telling me that yesterday, that either way you go, because this tries to go down the middle, you can lose more votes than you have right now. Yeah,
Robert, look, politically, does Corbett, we're going to end on this because I want to talk about the pensions, but if he doesn't get something out of this, I mean, the headlines are going to be governor's agenda fails.
Corbett 0 for 3.
Corbett 0 for 3, right?
Yeah, well, the poll numbers now in your polls and others are now a consistent pattern of very low. And the other window you would have would be, mid-December before Christmas, and then you're in election year.
Yeah. Yeah, and election year, not a good time to do big things in the legislature, as both of you had.
These people don't like to vote for except to put
big stuff, controversial pieces of legislation. All right, Brad, I'll turn to you. Pensions, out of the Senate Finance Committee, I think, led by Senator Brubaker. They now have a plan to deal with, here's the issue. The state, two big pension systems, teachers, for state employees, you pick the number, a $41 or a $45 billion debt. Looks like it could go to something huge, into the $60 billion in the next couple of years. Talk about Senator Brubaker's plan, how it differs from what the governor would like to see.
Well, this plan would require that new employees in state government have 401ks rather than being part of the current pension system, which has guaranteed benefits. Corbett's reform was much more substantial, went into the other benefits. This would seem like it's an easy thing to do, like a slam dunk, but it is not. You got the union still opposing this, and there's a claim that this would lose, billions of dollars for the system over the years because these people won't be contributing to the pension system. They'll invest in their own 401ks.
Yeah, one of the things that sort of strikes me as interesting about this is that police would be exempted from that. They would be, under the proposal, still permitted to stay in the defined benefit program.
That's on the theory that a lot of times they're retiring, earlier in their, maybe after they're putting your 25-year thing in their 40s or 50s. Another interesting thing in this is that they would have for elected officials, once you're reelected, then you would start going into the 401k.
So this
I thought that was interesting.
The proposal now before the Senate, right, would in effect cover all employees, judicial as well as legislative, as well as rank and file state employees. Correct? New ones, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So.
And your reelection you'd be new as of your reelection.
You would be new, and you'd be in the 401k type. Yeah. We're not quite sure under what category of the. All right, prospects. I'll start with you. Prospects of passage of this.
Well, that's hard because neither chamber has yet to vote to pass it. And the other issues we're talking about, at least each chamber has voted for one. No one's voted yet.
Yeah,
so
you have a transportation bill. I'll get into that with Bob in a minute. Over in the House, you have the privatization of alcohol passed the House over in the Senate, right?
Yeah. This is neither chamber yet.
Nothing's ever impossible in the legislature. They can do things so fast when they really want to, so you can't ever rule it out. However, it appears to me there isn't enough time to get transportation liquor. It's an uphill fight from here. You would call it very iffy at best.
Any other issues that, for our viewers, that they need to watch out for in these waning days that you can think of?
There was a very interesting thing this week with Senator Corman of the Appropriations Committee in the Senate. So floated this idea that he might be interested in, freezing the phase out of a major business tax to state corporate stock of franchise tax.
And the business community would not be happy with that.
Right, and a Republican suggested, which I thought was interesting, that is on the House side, that they want to get this thing killed because if Corbett doesn't get reelected, they're starting to look at that scenario. The thing would still be there.
The business, in other words, there won't be the reduction of the business taxes that the business community wants. Yeah, I think we're probably going to have our business panel on next week to we haven't looked at that subject for a while. All right, final question for you guys. State budget. The budget itself doesn't seem to be as controversial as these other things, right, Brad? It doesn't look like the budget itself. Governor may try to help out the Philadelphia School District. We've been reading. Some say he won't agree to more money. Some say they may put $100 billion up. Anything that you can see likely to hold the budget up? Forget those other issues. They could too. That we've been talking about.
Only potentially that, how Philadelphia School District is handled, but very unlikely that will occur. Education funding will continue to be a huge argument, but it won't hold it up.
All right, we're going to talk about the important subject of transportation funding with Bob Latham in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hey, welcome back to the program. Well, there's probably no bigger issue before the legislature and the governor right now than the whole business of roads, bridges, and mass transit. I have Bob Latham here. He's been with us for a couple of years, our expert from the Associated Pennsylvania Constructors, talking about these various issues. Bob, as always, welcome to the program.
Nice to be here.
All right, let's bring us up to date for our viewers. Where does go through some of the elements that remain to be resolved in the effort to get transportation funding accomplished?
Well, of course, a week or so ago, the Senate passed Senate Bill 1, which is the major transportation package. It mirrors what the Transportation Funding Coalition recommended, an increase of about $2.5 billion a year after a period of time. It attacks highway backlogs for PennDOT, local governments, also public transit, and intermodal. For the first time, it's a system-wide approach. The Senate showed incredible leadership and the ability to work together. Bipartisan, 45-5. Vote for that. A very strong.
You never get 45 senators to agree.
To agree on where to have lunch.
Maybe naming a bridge, right?
Maybe naming a bridge. We've gotten that many. So our hats off to the leadership on both sides of the aisle in the Senate on that. Now it's in the House. It's facing some opposition for some reason. I don't understand why, when you have that kind of support and bipartisanship in the Senate, we can't seem to work together in the House. So we face an uncertain future, but we're very hopeful that things will be worked out in the House and we'll get this passed by the end of the month. It is imperative. Otherwise, we have a lot of people who will not be called back to work this year.
Right. Now, there's one issue that the House seems reluctant to do. We can talk about the total spend, whether it's $2.5 billion, as you point out, or $1.8 billion, which the governor originally recommended. But the one issue that seems somewhat contentious has to do with a $100 fee. I'll call it that. You'll correct me if I'm wrong. If you get a ticket, let's say you get a speeding ticket.
It's a surcharge on speeding tickets.
Go ahead. Explain that.
Well, basically, if you get a speeding ticket now, you get a fine. This would levy a $100 surcharge on top of the fine, mandatory, and that money would be essentially put into the public transportation program in the general fund. So it would go to fund public transit throughout the Commonwealth, not just in the big cities, but rural transit as well.
And that's a major sticking point.
Apparently in the House, yes, it is. They're looking at some of the registration fees that were in Senate Bill 1. We, on the Transportation Funding Advisory Committee, also recommended an increase in the registration fees. We have the lowest registration fees in the country.
Not increase for how long? Decade or so?
At least to 15 to 20 years, absolutely. So, I mean, it's time to modernize. It's time to get moving. It's time to understand that these things can't be free forever. What other utility has not increased its rate in 16 years?
Yeah, so if they take out, and I want to move on, if they take out the $100 million, doesn't that leave a hole in helping mass transit, which I think, tends to be more of a city, although I'll tell you what, I've been on trains recently. There are a lot of people who aren't big city people who are, using the infrastructure, the mass transit, right?
Well, certainly. I mean, when we're going to talk a little bit about polling, but when we talked about safety on roads and congestion relief, particularly congestion relief in the urban areas, that means better service on public transit. It's very important. So one of the things about the current Senate Bill 1 that came over from the Senate is it really gets at the needs of the entire Commonwealth. It's a system-wide approach.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about some public opinion survey work.
Sure.
But before I do that and leave this, but that hole would have to be filled some way, somehow, by some other mechanism,
We
correct?
believe so. We're part of a large coalition that includes 35 to 40 local chambers of commerce.
Right.
The Pittsburgh Chamber just came out with ads on this. The business community, labor, all wants the Senate version, so you need to fill that hole to have a system-wide approach.
All right, when we come back, we want to get into some public opinion. We're going to continue our conversation with Bob Latham.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Hi, welcome back to the program. We're talking with Bob Latham from the Associated Pennsylvania Constructors. We're going to talk a little about this important infrastructure. Over the years, I've done some research on this subject, looking at a variety of ways to think about it. You know, it's my real job as a pollster. Let's talk about some of that. How important is this to the voters of the state of Pennsylvania?
Well, I think, once again, I think Senate Bill 1 passing 45-5 shows that the senators are in touch with the people in their districts. I mean, we've done polling with you over the last 4 or 5 years. The conventional wisdom is that, oh, this is a difficult issue, but actually the public is there. They understand that they want safe roads in their communities. They want jobs that are created by less congested roads, and they want to be able to get around in their communities. In fact, our polling is showing that about 90% of the people that we poll say, yes, this is an important issue. We want to see our General Assembly and our leaders get at it.
Yeah, one of the other big questions has to do with support. You know, we got to pay for them. Somebody has to pay for them. We can't do all this construction that everybody wants done and we don't pay for them.
Well, you know, it's funny. Some people are skeptical of polls because they, oh, you're just trying to find the information you want to hear. But we actually, your method actually went out and asked people so we would know where they are. And of course, after we asked, do you think it's important? Then that back to reality question, are you willing to pay for it? Yeah. And so, rather than asking about this particular tax or that particular tax, we talked about the level at which they might be willing to pay. And what we found was almost just under 60%, 59% to be exact, in a recent poll said they're willing to pay about $2.50 a week additional for safer roads in their community, better access to public transit, and the economic development that comes along with that. And that is exactly the amount that average motorists would pay under Senate Bill 1 as the Senate passed it.
What's fascinating is I don't think whoever did the poll, whatever poll was done by whatever method, there's been almost uniform support for the notion that this is something important for the state to do. And I think that's a big takeaway.
Well, if you look at the coalition we're part of, the Keystone Funding Coalition, there are 150 groups there. They range from AARP to all the agricultural groups to
business and labor.
Business and labor working together. Healthcare organizations, because hospitals have to get their workers to the hospitals in order for them to work.
And how about emergencies when you're out on a road and there's an accident and they have to get there?
We could go on for a long time about that.
Before I want to get in here because I want to get this in. We talked in the past, and Governor Corbett was huge on these public-private partnerships to do a lot of this infrastructure help.
Well, we follow this issue closely, and and I've heard the Secretary say this: unless the final product is at about the level that Senate Bill 1 passed, you're not going to have extra money for the state to do its portion of these public-private partnerships. So we hear a lot about privatization, particularly from our friends in the Republican Party, and that's important, and how we can access private capital to leverage transportation bills. If something passes it as a watered-down version of the current bill, you're not going to see any of that private money come into the system.
So you have to have some public money to help out with the private money in order to get this done.
Absolutely.
Correct? All right, well, as always, thanks for the update. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, stay well.